doubts about it, we had to develop a virtual college. And there's a number of reasons behind it. Cost effectiveness, dissemination, the new information tools and so on, and we'll get to all of that. But we have a legal obligation to develop a virtual college for parties. And I think that's very important. But it also had a number of benefits when you look at virtual learning, particularly for an institution, a bureaucracy. What we say is the convention. It better integrates existing courses with other materials in development. You can link it with existing materials, standardization, consistency across different programs. From an educator, think of a university, and think of the colleges and different schools within a university. And what most modern universities are trying to do is to create cross-disciplinary programs where you bring in people from all different disciplines and trying to figure something out and how to do it. You'll see my colleague Mark works in a center of excellence that's very similar to that. It allows you to pick and choose what you want to do. When we designed the college, it offers the user the possibility to find the information they need or take the course in a serial fashion, one step after another. So it tries to serve a multi-purpose. The courses will be multi-supportive and offer a balanced curriculum, but also offer the CITES community the ability to provide their expertise. We have people from the Animals and Plants Committee participating as mentors. We have experts that are able to give advice. We have guest lecturers in the course, and so on and so on. Because you have to remember, CITES is a very different convention from most of the other biodiversity conventions. We're not only a conservation and sustainable use convention, we're also a trade convention. Right? We regulate trade. And it's an area of CITES, of which is part of my expertise, is the commerce part. And we regulate the transboundary movement of a good, be it a species or a derivative, but it's still a good that crosses an international border. And as Alison, my colleague, will be speaking, this requires a number of regulatory administrative steps to be undertaken, and mostly with regard to documentation. Now, what makes the convention absolutely fascinating from a biodiversity indicator point of view is that these certificates go into something that's called a trade database, which is the basis of what we call an annual report. So every time that you, as the management authority, allows the export or the import of a CITES-listed species, you issue a permit. And that permit accompanies the species through its business chain until it gets to the recipient. But that permit is also archived or registered into something called the trade database. And the trade database may be one of the largest sustainable use databases in the world. It has millions of records. And from those records, you can ascertain the levels of trade in the species. Meaning that you can tell if a species is being, well, suppose trade goes up. What does that mean? Is the species being overexploited? Has the species recovered to a degree that you can have more exploitation? Has the market changed? Or another similar species goes up? What does that tell you? Does it mean that that species has been overexploited, so you have to exploit another species? So it's an indicator. Which that means is that you can measure, you can quantify the levels of international trade, and through that quantification, you can have an idea of whether trade in that species is sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, then you can take population surveys and other science-based activities to ascertain that that trade in species indeed does remain sustainable as well. So it's very different. It's a conservation, but it's also trade. So that's basically what the virtual college looks like. It was launched last year in June. There's a number of courses. The most important one, of course, for us today is the non-detriment. So, very shortly, it has vastly increased our capacity to meet the needs of the parties. Because again, CITES is a science-based in trade convention, and the requirements of CITES are very significant. A party has to undertake a number of science-based activities to be able to undertake trade. And another thing that makes CITES a bit different from other biodiversity conventions is that CITES has what we say teeth. We can undertake what's a significant trade review to see if trade indeed has been sustainable. If it's found that trade is not sustainable, you can issue a recommendation to suspend trade with the party. Now, that can have significant economic results, particularly if you're a developing country and that's an income deriving activity. It's cost effective, 24/7 training and transfer of expertise. Think of the thousands of workshops that you've attended. And everybody gets excited, but all of a sudden somebody gets a promotion, somebody leaves, you have to go back to writing reports and memos and so on. And whatever decisions, whatever expertise was transferred at that workshop may be lost. But the idea here is that we can encapsulate the expert of, say, someone that is very knowledgeable in a certain domain, archive that knowledge and make it available any time of the day that the person needs it. We can establish and expand existing networks, and I think that's very important. Another interesting aspect of this college is that we've linked with a number of higher education institutes, the International University of Andalusia in Spain being one. I don't know if you know this, but they have a master's degree entirely devoted to CITES. So every new semester of the master's level course, the students will have to take about 4 credits online through the virtual college. Now, what that program has done is that it's created an incredible network among students, because most of them work in management or scientific authorities. And by participating in the college, we can offer them the network, the physical layer that's required for the communication to occur. And we've also strengthened traditional capacity building activities, which in my opinion, I think are becoming less and less effective because of the high mobility of experts that they have. One of the great problems in the African continent is keeping experts. Because the moment someone becomes expert in a certain domain, in a certain area of expertise, they get a promotion, they get moved somewhere else, they assume other responsibilities, and that expertise in that very specific domain for which they were responsible for all of a sudden disappears. Social interaction. You might ask, how do we learn? Right? You look at a child, how does a child learn? Something like 50,000 words by your 5th birthday or something. Well, most of it is not through school settings. It's not through traditional learning. Children learn mostly by incidental learning, just like we do. We don't really know how we learn something, all of a sudden it's in our head, we seem to have learned it. But most of the other learning that occurs is through social interaction. A clash of ideas, cognitive dissonance, your ideas are challenged. The greatest example I can think of, personal example, is always university. I used to work on a mainframe computer, and a first-year student came up to me and said, Mr. Silva, Dr. Silva, blah, 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 why are you still using a mainframe? Why don't you use these workstations, and they're networked with this operating system called Unix, and you can do this and that and that. And I just laughed him off. And you looked at the architecture of social communication today is based entirely on what that first-year student was trying to explain to me. So it creates that social interaction among us in this room, although right now this is pretty passive for me speaking and you listening to me, that allows new ideas, it allows that regeneration of knowledge to occur. It ensures sustainability of the activity and the transfer of knowledge. The idea that you can encapsulate knowledge and save it for later use is very, very important. You see a whole new profession now that's called a knowledge engineer that sits with an expert and tries to, if then, a number of rules to more or less figure out the heuristics that they use to problem solve something. And again, the easiest one allows you to disseminate things far easier than before. Different types of strategies to learn. Learner control of navigation. Perhaps you don't like to learn in a linear fashion. Perhaps you like to jump around, mix things, go to another course. A little bit like sitting in on different lectures in the university. Contextualized problem solving. You learn through telling stories. Storytelling is one of the most effective ways to transfer the knowledge you have, but also something that's meaningful, so that when you tell the story, you're able to map it to your own personal experience. That's why when you try to teach something, you try to make it as contextualized, as meaningful, as grounded in someone's experience as possible. Now think that this CITES works in an incredible multicultural environment. We have 176 countries, September 25th, arranged as joined. That's something I'm not sure you knew yet. But how do you contextualize the learning for that many different cultures and ways of doing things? Well, mostly we use mentorships. We use what we call cognitive apprenticeships, where we try to get someone from that region to tell a very grounded, real-life example of what happened to the population of which they're dealing with. And lastly, critical thinking. You learn through problem solving. Nothing is worse. Actually, the environment we have right now is not a very good learning environment. You should be solving a problem. You should be working through a real-life, grounded example based in a type of, say, a story that makes sense to you, that allows you to come to a conclusion through various different steps. These are just some sections in the virtual college. You have a training center, which has been one of the most popular. We have materials to assist training the trainers, and also a library. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's the Towers of Hanoi. You might have seen it in that movie, the latest Planet of the Apes movie. It's used for kids in problem-solving activities. The kids have to move each one of those donut things in each one of those different things, so that it looks exactly like this here. You can never have a larger circle on top of a smaller one. And kids that have problem-solving, they can't solve problems for some reason. You ask them to do something called the think aloud protocol. In other words, you ask them to explain how they're trying to solve this problem while they're moving these things around. It's one of the most effective ways to learn why a child can learn. Well, it's the same thing with the virtual college. We have each course, every 2 screens or so, will have an exercise that we ask the user to complete before they move on. And then we can go back and see where the mistakes were in that exercise and try to figure out where the problem was. Like, where was the flaw, the bone in the throat that kept that person from understanding the concept. Teaching of causal principles and elaboration of sequences. What are the heuristics that allow you to solve something? Is it linear? Is it through a sequential type of approach? And how do you teach a very complex concept, non-detriment findings in this group, to, say, novices that have never encountered it before? So, the first course really tried to understand parties how to undertake a non-detriment finding. Non-detriment is at the heart of science. You cannot engage in trade if that trade is not sustainable, if it's not detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. There's no ifs and buts. If the trade is detrimental, then if a party continues to engage in non-detrimental trade, parties can undertake a review of significant trade to see if indeed it is detrimental, and then issue a recommendation to suspend trade. That can have significant impacts on developing countries. However, this exercise is complex. It requires several levels of scientific undertaking, population surveys, monitoring, understanding of species, how do you count species in the wild, and so on and so on. And in the design of the course, we try to do it through critical thinking. There's a number of exercises that you have to take. Contextualized learning that try to ground the exercises in real life experience. Mentorships. We have people from the scientific authorities and management authorities that participate in the course and try to guide the students if they have questions. It's available in French, English, and Spanish. So in other words, all the concepts, all the learning concepts that allow a person, a novice, to understand or at least gain deeper knowledge in a domain, we've tried to include it into the course. Now, you've probably heard a lot about Web 2 tools and so on, and it's curious because in one way, everything has existed before, but everything is new as well. We've had, say, electronic forms since the beginning of the internet. I don't know how many of you used Usenet, for example. We've had blogs, people couldn't, but it's become much more integrated into everyday activity. It's become much more easier to use and much more accessible. And for that reason, I think the Web 2 tools have really taken off. But why are they important? Because they allow for the social interaction to occur where learning is able to generate. You can generate new concepts through social interaction. And if you have tools that offer that interaction, then so much the better. In many ways, it's curious because the internet was never conceived for what we're using it for. The internet was conceived to allow you to access another computer and exchange files in case of a communication breakdown. So if half the United States disappeared, they could transfer the files still from one computer to another in a very easy fashion. So that's why one of the first protocols that was developed was file transfer protocol. The second one was Telnet, teletype network, to allow you to teletype into another computer. The last protocol that they thought would be fun was a simple mail transfer protocol that allowed you to send emails. And from that, everything spiraled. And if you look at the internet today, it's communication. It's the texting, the emails, the real life chat and so on that has really allowed the type of interaction that has made it so popular. I really don't think that e-commerce, viewing movies, and all of these things would have ever been possible if we could not communicate the way we do. And being the social animals that we are, we are incredible social animals. I've always found it funny that in airplanes it's not that we have so much air rage, that we have so little air rage because everybody obeys the rules and you're in a cramped space with one of ours. But it's social interaction, social animals that we have that allows that interaction. We've gone through that in the CITES communities, and CITES has communities much more, perhaps, than the other conventions, primarily because of the number of instruments that exist. The master's program, where many of them are graduates, the possibility of a suspension of trade, and so on. Now, we tried to have as many partnerships as possible. The college is available in French, English, Spanish, but the Portuguese have translated all the training materials into Portuguese. The Chinese are looking into Chinese. Perhaps a Korean would like to translate it into Korean. A number of universities, the most important one to date is the International University of Andalusia, which has a master's dedicated to the college, and we've integrated the two right now. This gives you an idea of the usage. Now, what's interesting is quite a few countries from the developing world, Mexico, India, Colombia, and if you go further down the list, Thailand, Indonesia, China, and so on and so on. Very high regional use. Almost 7,000 visitors. Now, that might not seem a lot in a year, but this is not a popular site for popular things. It's a learning site. So if we assume if at least 1,000 of the 7,000 visitors have completed the course and have gained some knowledge, well, the impact, I would say, would be significant if these people are involved in science-related work. So we could never give enough workshops in a year for 1,000 people for that level of learning. 89 language groups in 176 countries, which matches the number of parties that we have. This gives you an idea of usage. The highest, of course, in North America, quite a bit in Brazil, Colombia, Europe, of course, UK, India, very high usage. Everywhere. The few countries that are missing are, I believe that might be Mali, perhaps Chad. You can tell they're countries that have some very severe problems, but then the Democratic Republic of Congo is a user. Somalia is not, and neither is Yemen. But very few countries, almost global